The story began in the quiet expanse of space, where humanity had long been sending satellites, probes, and listening stations to scan for any signs of life beyond Earth for years. The cosmos had seemed empty, or at least silent. Apart from the faint hum of distant stars and the occasional signal from human-made devices, but one day everything changed. A signal arrived that was unlike anything humanity had ever detected before. It was not a normal radio wave, nor a simple code that could be deciphered with standard algorithms. It carried a sense of urgency, a kind of desperation that immediately caught the attention of scientists and military officials alike. The signal was an SOS, a call for help coming from a distant alien civilization in a part of the galaxy that had barely been mapped. The SOS was chaotic and fragmented, as though the aliens were sending it in a hurry, without time to structure it properly. It carried their fear, their panic, and a clear message: something catastrophic was happening, and they were in grave danger. The sound of the signal itself, when converted into patterns and tones humans could interpret, was haunting. It seemed almost alive, pulsing with intensity and a strange urgency that sent shivers down the spines of those listening. Scientists in the observation stations worked tirelessly to understand the message. They ran simulations, analyzed the data, and tried to decode it. But the signal was unlike any language humanity had ever encountered. Meanwhile, word of the signal quickly reached the higher echelons of power on Earth. Military leaders and government officials convened in emergency meetings, discussing the implications of this unprecedented discovery. Some saw it as an opportunity for diplomacy and first contact. They wanted to send peaceful messages, perhaps even prepare a mission to rescue or assist the aliens. Others were more cautious, warning that the aliens might be a threat, or that the SOS could be a trap. There was fear, speculation, and heated debate. And yet amid all this uncertainty, one group stood ready to act decisively. They were known as the Deathworlders, an elite, secretive faction within humanity that specialized in rapid, overwhelming responses to extraterrestrial threats. The Deathworlders were unlike ordinary military personnel. They were trained to survive in hostile environments, to handle situations where hesitation could mean total disaster, and to act with precision and brutal efficiency. They had faced simulations of hostile alien worlds, extreme conditions, and unimaginable dangers. For them, the SOS was both an alert and a test. They did not see this as a diplomatic puzzle. They saw it as a potential threat that demanded immediate action. The very idea of waiting, of negotiating, or second-guessing was against everything they had been trained for. As the world watched with bated breath, the scientists continued to study the signal. It seemed that the SOS originated from a planet that orbited a distant star, a world with a fragile atmosphere and unstable weather patterns. The SOS described events that sounded like widespread destruction, massive storms, violent geological upheavals, and perhaps even attacks from unknown forces. The aliens themselves were technologically advanced, but their messages indicated that their systems were failing. The tone of fear in the SOS made it clear that they were desperate. They were pleading for help in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. Despite the urgency, there was confusion. Humanity had never encountered aliens before, and every attempt to interpret their signals ran the risk of error. Linguists, scientists, and engineers debated the meaning of the words and symbols, trying to determine whether the aliens were indeed asking for help or warning of something dangerous. Some believed that the SOS was genuine, a plea for rescue from a civilization on the brink of annihilation. Others worried that misinterpretation could be catastrophic. What if the SOS was a trap? What if it was a test designed to lure humanity into danger? The tension was palpable, but for the Deathworlders, such doubts only reinforced the need for swift action. The world outside the secret operations of the Deathworlders was in a state of anxious excitement. News channels buzzed with speculation, public forums filled with debate, and experts from various fields offered conflicting interpretations. The average citizen could only imagine what kind of beings might be sending such a signal, and what they could possibly be experiencing. Some envisioned peaceful, intelligent creatures on the edge of extinction. Others imagined terrifying monsters capable of threatening Earth itself. The unknown nature of the signal created a mix of fear and fascination that gripped the human population as days turned into weeks. The Deathworlders quietly prepared. They coordinated fleets, assembled ships with cutting-edge weaponry, and trained crews for the mission that lay ahead. Every detail was meticulously planned. They simulated countless scenarios, from alien hostility to natural disasters, preparing for any situation that could arise when they reached the distant SOS for the Deathworlders. Hesitation was not an option. The signal represented a challenge, a potential threat, and a responsibility all at once. Their discipline and rigorous preparation were unmatched, and they approached the mission with a focus that bordered on obsession. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the scientific community made breakthroughs in decoding parts of the SOS. They began to understand fragments of the alien language, piecing together snippets that hinted at the scale of the disaster. It appeared that the aliens were struggling to maintain control of their planet. Their cities were failing, communication networks breaking down, and their own defense mechanisms, if they had any, were collapsing. The scientists feared that whatever had triggered the SOS could spread, potentially threatening nearby star systems or even reaching Earth. The urgency of the situation became undeniable. Further validating the Deathworlders' decision to act quickly, the human leaders faced a moral dilemma. Sending help was not simply a matter of technology and logistics. It was also a question of responsibility. Could humanity justify intervening in the affairs of another civilization, especially one whose needs and culture were largely unknown? Would humanity's presence cause more harm than good? These questions were debated at length, but for the Deathworlders, the answers were clear. Action was necessary. They could not allow an entire civilization to perish if there was a chance to intervene, even if the cost or risk was high. Their approach was pragmatic, ruthless, and efficient. They believed that hesitation in space could be fatal, both for themselves and for those they intended to save. As the fleet prepared for launch, tension reached its peak. The SOS had already traveled for light years across space, carrying the aliens' fear and desperation. The Deathworlders, now aboard their ships, could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on them. Every decision, every maneuver, could have consequences beyond comprehension. The unknown nature of the alien world made them both cautious and ready for extreme action. The crew reviewed protocols, checked weapon systems, and prepared psychologically for the encounter ahead. The space between Earth and the alien planet, vast and empty, now seemed charged with anticipation, as though the universe itself were holding its breath. Finally, the fleet departed. The ships glided silently into the void, leaving Earth behind. The SOS continued to pulse across the stars, guiding the Deathworlders toward the distant planet in need. On board, the crew remained focused, yet contemplative. They knew they were about to make history. Whether this mission would result in salvation, catastrophe, or something in between, they were prepared to face it head-on. For the first time in human history, humanity was reaching out across the cosmos not just with curiosity, but with overwhelming power, responding to a call that was desperate, urgent, and filled with the weight of life itself. The story of the SOS and humanity's response was only beginning. The distant alien civilization, unknown and vulnerable, had sent a cry for help that could not be ignored. Humanity, with all its strengths, fears, and capabilities, was now poised to arrive. And the events that would unfold in the void of space would forever change the course of history for both species. This was not just a mission, it was a test of humanity's judgment, courage, and capacity for both destruction and salvation. And it all started with a single signal, pulsing across the galaxy, carrying hope, fear, and an urgent plea that demanded an answer. Asterisk after the SOS signal had been received, analyzed and debated endlessly on Earth. The Deathworlders knew that time was slipping away. They could not afford delays. Every moment spent on Earth planning, questioning, or second-guessing was a moment in which an entire civilization might be collapsing under invisible pressures. Whether natural or otherwise, the Deathworlders were not ordinary soldiers or scientists. They were humanity's most elite operatives, trained to survive in the most extreme environments, capable of handling threats that would terrify ordinary humans. They specialized in rapid, decisive action, and for them, the distant SOS was not merely a plea for help. It was a call to mobilize with precision and overwhelming force. The process of mobilization was immense. Humanity's deadliest fleet was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Ships of incredible size and strength, equipped with the most advanced technology, were summoned from hidden bases scattered across the globe. These were not just military vessels. They were floating fortresses capable of devastating firepower, penetrable shields, and advanced reconnaissance systems that could analyze and respond to alien environments in real time. Every system was designed for versatility and dominance, able to engage both defensive and offensive operations with equal skill. The Deathworlders knew that arriving at the alien planet without full readiness was not an option. Failure was not permitted because hesitation could lead to the total extinction of those they sought to rescue or worse, the loss of countless human lives in an unexpected encounter as the fleet prepared. The atmosphere among the crew was a mixture of anticipation, tension, and disciplined focus. They ran simulations over and over, practicing scenarios in which alien defenses could be hostile, in which communication attempts might fail, and in which the very environment of the alien planet could threaten their survival. Every possible danger was considered, every contingency accounted for. Despite the exhaustive planning, there remained a pervasive uncertainty. The unknown nature of the alien civilization made every step risky. No one could predict the reactions of beings who had never met humans before. Yet the Deathworlders were conditioned to act decisively. Their discipline was unwavering. As the fleet approached its final launch configuration, there was an intense focus on coordination. Every ship had a designated role. Every crew member had a responsibility that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The fleet was organized in a way that emphasized both strength and efficiency. Advanced scouts and reconnaissance drones were prepared to be deployed at the earliest possible moment. To assess the planet and relay vital information back to the main fleet, support ships carrying medical supplies, environmental suits, and emergency evacuation systems were ready to provide aid in case of disaster. Combat vessels, armed with weapons designed to neutralize threats instantly, were positioned strategically to respond to any unforeseen hostility. Despite the heavy preparations, there was no room for arrogance. The Deathworlders understood that the alien civilization might possess capabilities far beyond human imagination. The SOS, after all, was evidence of desperation. Whatever had caused the aliens to send it had already demonstrated that they were facing challenges beyond their control. Natural disasters, technological failures, or unknown external threats could all be in play. The Deathworlders approached the mission with the understanding that adaptability would be crucial. They prepared to react to any outcome, from a peaceful rescue to a confrontation of unprecedented scale. The tension was not only among the crew, but also among Earth's decision-makers. While the Deathworlders were trained to act independently, their actions were constantly monitored by mission control and high-level authorities. Every maneuver, every calculated step toward the alien planet was tracked and analyzed. The political and scientific ramifications of the mission were enormous. Humanity was on the verge of making first contact with an alien civilization, a situation fraught with potential for both historic diplomacy and catastrophic disaster. Some leaders argued for caution, emphasizing careful communication and observation. But the Deathworlders' philosophy was clear. In space, hesitation could be fatal. Acting decisively, even at the risk of misjudgment, was the only way to protect both themselves and the beings in distress. The journey toward the alien planet was long, spanning vast distances across space, but every day brought new challenges and moments of preparation. Training simulations continued in the artificial gravity chambers of the ships, where crew members practiced emergency protocols and combat readiness. Specialists studied the limited data from the SOS, trying to understand the alien culture, social structure, and technological capabilities. Even with advanced technology, there was no certainty. Every new discovery brought more questions than answers. The aliens' society, climate, and level of technological development were all largely unknown. The SOS suggested sophistication, but it also conveyed a civilization on the edge of collapse, struggling to survive amidst forces it could not control. As the fleet drew closer to the target, the sense of reality became tangible. For the first time, the Deathworlders could observe the planet through long-range sensors. It was a world of stark contrasts, areas of apparent civilization, glowing faintly with energy signatures of life, and vast regions of chaos where storms, seismic activity, or other mysterious forces seemed to dominate. The scale of the SOS's urgency became clear. The aliens were not exaggerating. Their situation was dire, and any delay in intervention could result in complete annihilation. The Deathworlders, trained to analyze risk but act with precision, felt a mixture of anticipation and grim determination. The responsibility to act correctly, to interpret the situation, and to apply decisive force weighed heavily on every member of the fleet. Communication with Earth became increasingly crucial. Scientists and analysts monitored every piece of data the fleet collected. They fed information back to the Deathworlders, advising on possible approaches, analyzing potential risks, and attempting to reconstruct the alien civilization's intentions. Despite their best efforts, uncertainty remained. Every signal from the SOS was a puzzle piece, and the image it formed was still incomplete. The aliens' language, technological systems, and behavioral patterns were foreign, leaving room for misinterpretation. But the Deathworlders were trained to operate in uncertainty, and they relied on their experience, instincts, and rigorous training to make rapid decisions. Finally, the fleet reached a point where sensors could provide more detailed scans of the planet's surface. The results were sobering. Evidence of structural collapse, environmental instability, and technological failure was clear. Cities had lost power grids, transportation systems were disrupted, and large portions of the surface seemed uninhabitable. The SOS's urgency was fully justified. The Deathworlders realized that the alien civilization was indeed facing a crisis beyond anything they could have predicted. Their initial approach, based on caution and preparation, had to shift toward immediate readiness for action. Every crew member braced for what might come next. Even with all the preparation, doubts and questions lingered. The fleet did not know exactly how the aliens would react to their arrival. Would they welcome assistance? Or would they perceive the human fleet as a hostile threat? Miscommunication could trigger panic, defensive measures, or worse. The Deathworlders understood that first impressions in space could be decisive. They had to strike a balance between showing overwhelming capability, to deter potential threats, and demonstrating intent to help. To fulfill the purpose of responding to the SOS, the psychological aspect of the mission was as important as the technological one, and every move was carefully calculated. The atmosphere within the fleet was tense but disciplined. Crew members focused on their duties, running through protocols, checking systems, and preparing mentally for the unknown. They understood that the SOS had set in motion a chain of events that could not be reversed. Humanity's response was not just about saving another civilization. It was also a test of how humans could operate under extreme uncertainty and moral complexity. The decisions made in the next moments could determine the fate of the aliens, the crew, and potentially humanity itself. The Deathworlders were ready to carry that burden, fully aware of the stakes. As the fleet neared the alien world, the vastness of space seemed to amplify the tension. The planet below, small but illuminated by its own star, held life, despair, and the unknown. Every sensor reading, every fragment of data from the SOS added to the sense of urgency. The Deathworlders were poised at the threshold of action, trained to respond decisively and without hesitation. The SOS had not only summoned humanity's attention, it had also summoned humanity's most powerful response. The alien civilization's fate and the unfolding story of this unprecedented encounter were now in the hands of those prepared to act with unmatched precision and force in the final hours before arrival. The fleet conducted last-minute simulations, reviewed emergency protocols, and ensured that all systems were fully operational. The Deathworlders had trained for decades for situations just like this: unknown environments, potential hostility, and the urgent need to save lives while managing risk. They were ready for the unexpected, aware that even the best prepared fleets could face surprises in an alien world. Yet their resolve was absolute. The SOS had demanded action, and action was what they would deliver: swift, decisive, and overwhelming if necessary. The story of humanity's response to the alien SOS, through the perspective of the Deathworlders, was a mixture of discipline, fear, preparation, and moral complexity. The fleet's mobilization represented not just technological power, but also the human capacity for determination, adaptability, and resolve in the face of the unknown. As the alien planet drew nearer, every member of the Deathworlders' fleet understood that history was about to be made. What awaited them on the surface, how the aliens would respond, and whether the mission would succeed or fail remained uncertain. But one truth was clear: humanity had committed its most elite forces to answer the desperate call of a civilization in peril, and nothing would stop them from carrying out their mission. When the Deathworlders finally arrived in orbit around the alien planet, the first clear images and sensor readings revealed a world in chaos. From above, the planet looked like a jewel cracked in half, glowing faintly with remnants of civilization. While vast swaths of its surface were consumed by storms, earthquakes, or other violent disturbances, the SOS that had traveled light years across space had not exaggerated. The aliens were truly in danger, and the signs of their struggle were everywhere. The Deathworlders, trained to analyze threats instantly, scanned every inch of the planet, trying to understand the situation before making any move. Yet the more they saw, the more complex the problem became. The chaos was not uniform. Some regions showed organized cities with functioning technology, while others were ruins, abandoned or destroyed by forces that remained unclear. The first attempts at communication began cautiously. The Deathworlders used advanced translation systems designed to decode unknown languages, attempting to convey their peaceful intentions. Messages were sent, repeated, and monitored for response. Yet even with all the technology and preparation, the aliens' reactions were difficult to interpret. There was hesitation, confusion, and most importantly, fear. For the aliens, the sudden appearance of a massive fleet of unknown ships, larger and more powerful than anything they had ever seen, was terrifying. They had sent an SOS asking for help, but they had not expected such a presence. In their panic, they misinterpreted the fleet as a threat rather than a rescue. The misunderstanding escalated quickly. Minor actions like scouting drones descending toward cities were perceived by the aliens as attacks. Their automated defenses, still partially functional, activated against the approaching fleet. Energy beams shot into the sky, and small explosions erupted in scattered areas, signaling that the aliens were prepared to defend themselves. The Deathworlders, who had trained for hostile encounters, immediately adjusted. They needed to contain the situation without causing further panic, but the window for subtlety was shrinking rapidly. Every moment of hesitation increased the risk of damage to the very civilization they had come to save. Amid the chaos, the Deathworlders discovered more about the alien society. The SOS had conveyed urgency, but the true extent of the civilization's fragility became apparent only through observation. Their cities, though technologically advanced, were heavily dependent on delicate systems. A minor disruption in energy flow or communication had caused wide-scale panic. Many aliens were unprepared for large-scale disasters, lacking the resilience or infrastructure to survive in extreme conditions. The Deathworlders realized that the SOS had been a true cry for help. But the aliens' fear of the unknown had amplified the perception of threat when humanity arrived. Despite the misunderstandings, the Deathworlders remained calm and methodical. They deployed observation drones to gather detailed information while maintaining a safe distance. They assessed the alien defenses, the environmental hazards, and the patterns of movement among the population. Their goal was to avoid unnecessary destruction while still preparing for the possibility that the aliens might respond aggressively. Every piece of data was fed into their systems to develop a comprehensive understanding of the planet's condition and the likely Behavior of its inhabitants. The first attempts at direct contact were made with small, unmanned vehicles that hovered above the cities. These craft projected peaceful visual and audio signals, showing symbols intended to communicate assistance rather than aggression. Still, fear dominated the alien response. Panic spread quickly through the population. Entire districts were evacuated, defensive weapons were activated. Some regions experienced complete communication breakdown. The SOS, which had seemed like a simple plea for aid, had now become a catalyst for chaos. As the aliens struggled to comprehend the enormous fleet hovering over their world, in the midst of this, the Deathworlders faced critical decisions. They had come to respond to a genuine call for help, but now the risk of miscommunication threatened to turn the mission into disaster. The possibility of collateral damage grew with each passing moment. The crew understood that a single misstep could escalate into a full-scale conflict, potentially annihilating the very civilization they had intended to save. Their training emphasized rapid problem-solving. They began devising strategies to minimize harm while asserting control over the situation. The challenge was not only technical, but psychological. How to calm an alien population while maintaining readiness for a potential attack? The aliens themselves were a mixture of intelligent beings, fearful creatures, and automated defense systems. The Deathworlders observed that while many of the aliens were sentient and capable of reasoning, panic had taken over. Some groups attempted to communicate, sending back frantic signals, but these were often misinterpreted by others on the planet. Automated systems designed for security continued to fire at any approaching object without distinguishing between friend or foe. The SOS, once a single cry for help, had triggered a chain reaction of confusion and fear, making the Deathworlders' task even more difficult. As hours passed, it became evident that diplomacy alone would not suffice. The Deathworlders were trained to respond to threats with overwhelming force if necessary. But their initial goal was still rescue. They needed to find a way to demonstrate their intentions without provoking further hostility. Observation drones and communication vehicles were sent to isolated areas, where small groups of aliens were trying to organize emergency response efforts. The Deathworlders provided guidance, helping stabilize failing systems and prevent localized disasters. These actions began to show some aliens that the fleet's presence was not entirely harmful, but mistrust and fear were deeply ingrained after centuries of dealing with environmental fragility and sudden disasters. One of the most critical moments came when the Deathworlders discovered the first signs of organized alien leadership attempting to respond to the fleet. A council of alien officials was trying to coordinate emergency measures, but their signals were being scrambled by damaged infrastructure and the overwhelming size of the approaching fleet. The Deathworlders made a bold decision. They used precision holographic messages to communicate directly with these leaders, bypassing damaged communication networks. The messages were designed to convey peace and assistance while demonstrating the capacity to prevent further harm. This delicate approach required exact timing and careful calibration, as any error could trigger defensive responses from automated systems or panic among the population. Despite these efforts, tension remained high. The Deathworlders observed that some areas were fortifying themselves, preparing for an attack they believed inevitable. Defensive energy shields and weapons were powered up, while civilians sought shelter in underground bunkers or natural caverns. The fleet's advanced sensors could detect movement, energy output, and environmental anomalies in real time, giving the Deathworlders a comprehensive understanding of the situation. But even this technology could not fully account for irrational fear or panic-driven decisions. Every step forward required balancing caution with decisiveness, a task that tested both their skills and their patience. The Deathworlders also began to assess the extent of the planet's environmental challenges. Storms, seismic activity, and unpredictable weather patterns complicated every operation. Cities that were structurally intact could be destroyed by a single miscalculated landing, and open areas were vulnerable to natural hazards. The SOS had conveyed desperation, but the Deathworlders now understood that survival depended as much on environmental management as on human intervention. They deployed specialized equipment to stabilize localized storms, reinforce failing infrastructure, and monitor dangerous areas, creating temporary safe zones for alien survivors. Amid the operational challenges, a moral dilemma emerged. The Deathworlders were capable of using force to secure the planet, but doing so could destroy the very beings they had come to save. Each decision had to consider the risk of escalating the aliens' fear against the urgency of preventing further collapse. The SOS had set the stage for a delicate operation. The aliens were calling for help, but their fear of the unknown made even the most careful approach potentially lethal. The Deathworlders' philosophy of decisive action was being tested in a situation that required patience, empathy, and precise timing. As the first full day of contact drew to a close, a fragile understanding began to emerge. Some alien communities recognized the Deathworlders' intention to help, accepting guidance and assistance. Others remained skeptical, preparing for confrontation. Automated defenses continued to fire sporadically, and the environment remained unstable. The Deathworlders knew that the mission's success depended on their ability to maintain control over both technology and perception. They continued to deploy drones, stabilize key regions, and communicate directly with alien leaders, gradually demonstrating that the fleet's overwhelming power was not meant to harm, but to protect. The Deathworlders had achieved a delicate balance. Misunderstanding and fear still dominated much of the population, but critical progress had been made. The aliens' initial panic had been contained in some areas. The rescue operations were beginning in regions that had been most vulnerable. The SOS had brought humanity's deadliest fleet to a world in chaos, and the first moments of contact had shown both the danger of miscommunication and the necessity of decisive action. The stage was now set for what would come next. The challenge of fully securing the planet, gaining the trust of the alien civilization, and navigating the fine line between rescue and devastation. The Deathworlders' first encounter with the alien world demonstrated a crucial truth. Intentions alone were not enough. Even a genuine SOS could lead to fear, misunderstanding, and potential conflict if the recipients misinterpreted the response. Humanity's might, channeled through the Deathworlders, had arrived as both a promise of salvation and a warning of overwhelming power. The aliens' SOS had been answered, but the outcome remained uncertain. Hinging on the Deathworlders' ability to combine precision, patience, and sheer force when necessary. The mission had moved from theoretical preparation into a real, unpredictable, and high-stakes engagement with a civilization on the edge of collapse. The fragile balance that had been established between the Deathworlders and the alien civilization began to crumble in ways that no one could have fully anticipated. The aliens were terrified. Their automated defense systems, still partially operational despite the disasters that had already struck their world, continued to fire at any movement in the sky. Panic spread among the population, and fear-driven decisions multiplied the chaos. Despite the Deathworlders' best efforts to communicate peaceful intent, the aliens' perception of threat remained dominant. Every attempt at diplomacy, every carefully projected message, struggled to pierce through the veil of panic and distrust. The Deathworlders faced a dilemma unlike anything they had trained for. They had come to respond to a genuine SOS, but the situation was now rapidly spiraling out of control. Delays, hesitation, or missteps could cost lives, not only of the aliens, but potentially of their own crew. They understood that the aliens' planet was fragile, with unstable environmental systems and infrastructure barely capable of sustaining life. The natural disasters, alone violent storms, quakes, and unpredictable energy surges posed a mortal threat. Adding human intervention to the mix, even one aimed at rescue, was risky, and yet inaction was not an option. The Deathworlders had to act decisively to prevent total collapse, even if the cost was immense. As tensions escalated, the first major clash occurred. An alien city that had initially tried to accept the Deathworlders' systems suddenly activated its defensive systems in full force. Automated turrets, energy barriers, and anti-aircraft defenses fired relentlessly at the hovering fleet. The Deathworlders' sensors recorded every movement, calculating responses in fractions of a second. They tried to minimize damage, focusing on neutralizing the city's automated defenses rather than the population itself. Yet the sheer scale of the force required to contain the situation inevitably resulted in destruction. Buildings collapsed, communication systems went offline, and fires spread uncontrollably. The SOS, which had begun as a call for help, is now the trigger for widespread devastation. Despite the destruction, the Deathworlders maintained discipline. Their training emphasized precision and efficiency. They knew that their mission required neutralizing threats without indiscriminate slaughter. And yet the line between control and devastation was thin. Each maneuver, each targeted strike, was calculated to subdue hostile systems while preserving as much of the population as possible. Even so, the aliens' panic made absolute precision impossible. Civilians fled into streets, into underground bunkers, and into areas that became targets during attempts to neutralize defenses. The fleet's leaders faced a moral quandary. They were saving the aliens by acting decisively, yet every action inflicted harm. Amid the chaos, pockets of survivors began to emerge. Small groups of aliens, initially paralyzed by fear, started responding to the Deathworlders' guidance. These groups became beacons of hope, moving to areas the fleet had stabilized, receiving aid, and attempting to rebuild communication channels. Observation drones and supply ships provided food, medicine, and equipment, allowing these small communities to survive amidst the widespread destruction. The contrast between devastation and survival was stark. The Deathworlders witnessed both the consequences of fear and miscommunication, and the resilience of beings fighting to endure under impossible circumstances. The Deathworlders also had to contend with the environment itself. The planet was not just a passive backdrop. It actively contributed to the chaos. Hurricanes swept across continents, earthquakes split cities, and energy surges disabled vital infrastructure. Attempts to stabilize affected regions required precise deployment of specialized equipment. Atmospheric regulators were activated to reduce storm intensity. Structural reinforcements were projected to prevent collapse, and emergency shelters were established to protect surviving aliens. Even with these interventions, the scale of natural disaster, combined with fear-driven responses, made the mission a race against time. The SOS had summoned humanity's deadliest fleet, and now the fleet's power was being tested against both nature and panic. In the midst of this, the Deathworlders discovered that not all alien factions were equally cooperative. Some communities interpreted the fleet's overwhelming presence as an existential threat and mobilized against it. Others, recognizing the Deathworlders' power and intent, sought assistance. This divergence in perception created a chaotic landscape in which the fleet had to respond differently in different regions. Combat units engaged hostile forces with precision strikes, while medical and engineering teams focused on stabilizing friendly zones. Every decision carried consequences that could ripple across the planet, affecting survival rates and the potential for long-term recovery. The moral weight of the situation intensified when the Deathworlders realized that some of the population that had sent the SOS, the very beings calling for help, were now directly threatened by the actions required to contain the planet's instability. Automated defense systems, environmental hazards, and localized chaos endangered these groups. The Deathworlders had to calculate every move with exceptional precision, deploying forces to protect alien survivors while simultaneously neutralizing systems that could escalate the disaster. The tension between saving lives and controlling destruction defined every moment of the operation in the process. The Deathworlders also observed the psychological effects on the aliens. Fear had spread like wildfire, and even areas untouched by direct destruction were destabilized by panic. Entire communities abandoned their homes, fleeing toward uncertain safety, often moving into regions already compromised by storms or structural collapse. Miscommunication among the aliens worsened the problem, as some believed the fleet was attacking, while others hoped for salvation. The SOS had initiated a chain reaction far beyond what any civilization could have controlled, and the Deathworlders' arrival meant to help. had become an unavoidable part of the chaos. As hours turned into days, the scale of devastation became increasingly apparent. Entire districts were reduced to rubble, energy grids failed, and communication networks collapsed. Yet, amidst the destruction, the Deathworlders continued to operate with relentless efficiency. Their strategy combined overwhelming force with precise humanitarian interventions. Areas deemed too dangerous were neutralized with care, while smaller, more stable zones were reinforced and supplied with aid. The fleet's advanced systems allowed real-time monitoring, enabling rapid adjustments in response to unexpected developments. Every strike, every intervention is calculated to minimize casualties. While asserting control over the unfolding chaos, the human crew also faced internal challenges. Witnessing such large-scale destruction, even while knowing it was necessary, weighed heavily on some members. Ethical debates surfaced within command ranks about the balance between decisive action and compassion. Some argued that the ends justified the means. Total control, even if it caused destruction, was necessary to save lives and prevent further collapse. Others cautioned that the psychological and moral impact of widespread devastation could create long-term consequences for both the aliens and humanity's reputation in the galaxy. These debates, while carefully managed, reflected the enormous responsibility the Deathworlders bore. In the midst of destruction, the first glimmers of recovery appeared. Alien survivors, guided by Deathworlders' drones and supply units, began to establish temporary shelters, stabilize damaged infrastructure, and create rudimentary communication networks. These efforts demonstrated resilience and adaptability, showing that even under the most extreme conditions, life could endure. The Deathworlders provided essential support, reinforcing hope while maintaining the power to act decisively if further threats arose. The balance between control, destruction, and recovery became a defining feature of the mission, highlighting the complexity of responding to an SOS in a world on the brink of collapse. Despite the devastation, the Deathworlders were aware that their actions were saving countless lives. Every moment spent neutralizing threats, stabilizing regions, and guiding survivors prevented further loss. They understood the paradox. Their overwhelming power, capable of total annihilation, was now the means of preservation. This duality of the capacity to destroy or save defined the essence of their mission. The SOS had brought them to the edge of a civilization's collapse, and their response, both destructive and protective, would determine the fate of an entire species. The Deathworlders had established control over key regions of the planet. Destruction had been extensive, unavoidable in some areas, but vital intervention had prevented total annihilation. The aliens' SOS had been genuine, and the response, though devastating, had also provided a lifeline. The population's survival depended on the careful balance between the fleet's overwhelming force and its precise humanitarian efforts. The Deathworlders had acted decisively, demonstrating both the destructive and protective capacities of humanity's deadliest fleet. As silence finally began to descend over stabilized areas, the Deathworlders reflected on the consequences of their actions. The devastation they had unleashed was immense, yet necessary. The SOS had been answered, but not in the way anyone had initially imagined. What began as a simple cry for help had turned into a mission defined by fear, misunderstanding, and overwhelming force. Humanity's intervention had saved lives, but at a cost that weighed heavily on every member of the fleet. The story of the SOS and its response was no longer just about rescue. It had become a testament to the complexity of first contact, the unpredictability of fear, and the power of decisive action in the face of unimaginable challenges. The planet had survived, its population fractured but still alive, and the Deathworlders had demonstrated their ability to act decisively under extreme conditions. Yet questions remained. Could trust be established between humans and aliens? Could the survivors rebuild and recover from the devastation? And most importantly, what would the Deathworlders learn from the delicate balance between destruction and salvation? The SOS had called them to action, and their response had reshaped the fate of a civilization, leaving both humans and aliens to confront the consequences of decisions made under pressure, fear, and uncertainty. The aftermath of the Deathworlders' intervention was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The alien planet, once a place of thriving civilization, now bore the scars of both natural disasters and humanity's overwhelming response. Cities had been leveled, entire regions were reduced to rubble, and the environment itself had been altered by the chaotic events. Yet, amidst this devastation, there were survivors, small pockets of aliens, who had endured both the disasters that had prompted the SOS and the destruction that had followed the fleet's arrival. The Deathworlders, despite their focus on decisive action, took a moment to assess the results of their intervention. They had prevented total extinction, but the cost had been immense. The first priority was to stabilize what remained of the alien population. The Deathworlders deployed emergency relief systems, providing food, water, shelter, and medical supplies to those who had survived. Advanced environmental regulators helped to manage storms and seismic activity, preventing further loss of life. Drones and robotic units assisted in rebuilding temporary infrastructure, clearing debris, and restoring critical systems. Despite their destructive power, the Deathworlders were now acting as caretakers, ensuring that the survivors could continue to live and adapt in the aftermath of the catastrophe. Every action had to be precise. Even minor mistakes could undo the fragile stability they were trying to create. The aliens themselves were struggling to understand what had happened. The SOS, meant as a cry for help, had been answered in a way they could barely comprehend. Some survivors were grateful, recognizing that the Deathworlders had saved their lives, while others were filled with fear and anger, perceiving humanity's overwhelming power as a threat rather than a rescue. Entire communities were traumatized, grappling with the loss of loved ones, destruction of homes, and the realization that the intervention had caused as much devastation as it had prevented. The Deathworlders' challenge was not just technical, it was psychological. They had to convey that their intentions had been to save lives. Even as they faced the consequences of the destruction they had caused, communication with the alien leadership became a central focus. Surviving officials, once terrified, began tentative dialogues with the Deathworlders. Advanced holographic messages and universal translation systems allowed for more precise interactions, helping to clarify intentions and prevent further misunderstandings. Through careful negotiation and demonstration of continued assistance, some level of trust began to form. The aliens, still wary, started to see that humanity's power was not solely a tool of destruction. For the first time, he recognized that the fleet's overwhelming capabilities could also protect them from the very dangers that had triggered the SOS yet. Rebuilding trust was a slow and delicate process. Fear and trauma ran deep. Many aliens had lost family members, homes, and entire districts. Their culture and social systems had been disrupted, leaving them disoriented and uncertain about the future. The Deathworlders worked tirelessly to create stability, establishing safe zones where survivors could gather, receive aid, and begin to rebuild their communities. Specialized teams trained in crisis management and cross-cultural communication assisted in helping aliens navigate their new reality. Every interaction was crucial, as even minor misunderstandings could reignite panic or hostility as the Deathworlders continued their work. They observed the resilience of the alien population. Despite the destruction and fear, small groups began to organize themselves, clearing debris, establishing communication networks, and attempting to restore essential services. The aliens' determination to survive impressed the Deathworlders. These efforts, while humble and precarious, demonstrated that the civilization still had the potential to recover. The SOS had not only summoned humanity's intervention, but it also revealed the strength and adaptability of the beings themselves. This resilience became a guiding factor for the Deathworlders, influencing their decisions on how to provide ongoing support without overwhelming or controlling the survivors. The environmental challenges of the planet remained significant. Storms continued to rage in some areas. Seismic activity threatened structural integrity, and the weakened ecosystem required careful management. The Deathworlders deployed specialized systems to stabilize these regions, including atmospheric regulators, energy shields, and automated monitoring units. These tools allowed for gradual restoration of critical areas, preventing further loss of life and providing the aliens with the opportunity to adapt to a recovering world. The combination of technological support and strategic guidance became the foundation for long-term recovery, bridging the gap between immediate survival and future stability. However, the consequences of the intervention extended beyond the immediate planet. News of the SOS and humanity's overwhelming response spread rapidly throughout the galaxy. Other civilizations, observing from afar, began to debate humanity's role and methods. Some viewed the Deathworlders as heroes, capable of responding decisively to crises and saving entire civilizations from extinction. Others feared the sheer scale of power and the potential for misinterpretation, worrying that a similar intervention could be catastrophic if humanity misjudged intentions. The moral and political implications of the SOS and its response became a subject of intense discussion, highlighting the delicate balance between power, responsibility, and ethical action within the fleet. The Deathworlders reflected on the outcomes of their mission. They had faced unprecedented challenges, navigating both natural disasters and the complex psychology of an alien civilization in panic. Their actions had prevented extinction, but they had also caused immense destruction. Every crew member carried the weight of this reality, understanding that history would judge the mission not only by lives saved, but also by the scale of devastation unleashed. The experience underscored the dual nature of their capabilities. Humanity's deadliest fleet could protect and destroy with equal efficiency, and wisdom in wielding such power was as critical as technological superiority. The aliens. Survivors gradually began to adapt. Temporary shelters evolved into more stable communities. Rudimentary infrastructure was restored, and communication systems were re-established. Cultural and social activities resumed cautiously, allowing the aliens to begin processing the trauma they had endured. The Deathworlders maintained oversight, ensuring that progress was not derailed by environmental hazards or remaining pockets of panic. Slowly, a sense of order emerged, demonstrating that even after overwhelming destruction, life could endure and civilizations could rebuild. The SOS, which had once represented desperation, now symbolized resilience, hope, and the potential for renewal. The relationship between the Deathworlders and the aliens evolved over time. Initial fear gave way to cautious collaboration. As the aliens learned to understand the intentions behind humanity's overwhelming presence, the survivors recognized that the fleet's power was a tool for protection, and some began to participate actively in the recovery process, guided by human expertise and technology. Communication improved, trust grew incrementally, and new systems were established to manage the planet's fragile environment. The SOS had sparked an unprecedented interaction between species, creating both challenges and opportunities that would shape the future of the planet. Yet, the cost of the mission remained clear. Entire regions had been obliterated, and the scars of destruction would linger for generations. The Deathworlders understood that their intervention, while necessary, had fundamentally altered the planet and its civilization. The survivors would remember both the aid and the devastation, carrying the memory of humanity's dual capacity for salvation and destruction. This duality became a central lesson for the Deathworlders in responding to crises of unimaginable scale. Even the most carefully executed actions could produce consequences that were difficult to predict or control. Back on Earth, the mission sparked intense debate. Governments, scientists, and citizens discussed the implications of responding to alien SOS signals. Some praised humanity's decisive action, emphasizing the lives saved and the technological prowess demonstrated. Others criticized the methods, questioning whether such overwhelming force could ever be justified, particularly when it led to large-scale destruction. The Deathworlders' intervention became a case study in ethics, strategy, and the complex responsibilities of species capable of wielding extreme power. The SOS had not only changed the alien world but had also reshaped humanity's understanding of its role in the galaxy. For the Deathworlders themselves, the mission ended with reflection and learning. They had faced the full spectrum of challenges that could arise from responding to an SOS. Natural disasters, fear-driven behavior, miscommunication, and the moral dilemmas of using overwhelming force. They had prevented extinctions, stabilized critical areas, and begun the process of rebuilding trust. But the mission had also revealed the limits of technology and strategy when confronted with uncertainty and panic. The experience reinforced the importance of preparation, adaptability, and moral judgment in the exercise of power, as the last stabilization measures were implemented. A tentative peace settled over the planet. Survivors began to rebuild their society, guided by the lessons learned from both the disasters they had endured and the intervention that had saved them. The Deathworlders prepared to leave, their mission complete in terms of immediate survival, yet leaving behind the legacy of destruction, guidance, and the possibility of future collaboration. The SOS had been answered, the civilization had been preserved, and humanity's deadliest fleet had demonstrated both its power and its responsibility in the end. The story of the SOS and the Deathworlders' response became a tale of contrasts. Destruction and salvation, fear and hope, chaos and order, each element had played a role in shaping the outcome. The aliens had survived, their civilization had been fundamentally altered, and humanity had learned profound lessons about the responsibilities that come with unmatched power. The SOS had called for help, and the Deathworlders had answered with total force, creating a legacy that would be remembered, studied, and debated for generations. The SOS, which had once seemed like a simple plea for assistance, had triggered a chain of events that tested the limits of courage, strategy, and morality. Humanity had intervened decisively, preserving life while reshaping a civilization in ways that could never be fully undone. The aftermath left both humans and aliens to confront the consequences, to learn from the experience, and to build a future informed by the extraordinary events that had unfolded across the stars. The story closed not with certainty, but with possibility. The aliens had survived, the Deathworlders had fulfilled their mission, and humanity had demonstrated its capacity for both destruction and protection. The galaxy had witnessed the immense consequences of responding to a desperate call for help, and the SOS had become a symbol of the delicate balance between power and responsibility, chaos and order, fear and hope. It was a reminder that even in the vast emptiness of space, life and intelligence, when called to action, could create outcomes of unimaginable scale and significance.